This next session, we're going to dive into again, state actions, but particularly we're going to look at high-quality instructional materials. So Arkansas, I'll let all of you come on up and take a seat in the comfy chairs. Arkansas is a state that has been a part of CCSSO's High-Quality Instructional Materials and Professional Development Network, or the IMPD. Many of you are also members, since 2020. And they have embodied this work on mathematics, and that's what they're going to delve into today. Access to high-quality instructional materials is something we are all very concerned about, and we realize that it has to be aligned with professional development. That's critical so that we implement the instructional materials, and state leaders can assist districts in selecting the materials. And while we cannot always make everyone do what we want them to do, state leaders, we do have a lot of levers. And we can use the levers we have to encourage our districts not only to adopt, but also to implement high-quality instructional materials. We have with us today on stage a group that has done just that and are continuing to do that. We have an incredible team, including Arkansas's Secretary of Education, Jacob Oliva. He has with him Deputy Commissioner Stacy Smith and Assistant Commissioner Kiffany Pride. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Secretary Oliva.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Okay, it works. So my name is Jacob Oliva. I'm a former reading addict and now a math person. Did I get it right? So we want to talk to you a little bit about some of the initiatives we've kind of been embarked on the last couple of years in the state of Arkansas around just about everything you see in those 6 key takeaways. So when I look at those bullets that are listed in that report, there are very actionable steps that each and every single one of us can take. And what that talks about, and we heard about the alignment piece, which is why we're going to talk a little bit about one section on high quality instruction materials, is that if you don't have clear alignment with standards, instruction, professional development, and assessments, then your system is not going to get the results you wanted to get. So I always like to say bad systems beat good people every single time. But I think if we were to go a step deeper, how did we get into this phenomena about wanting to have deeper understanding and conversations around maths? And I like to say plotting the math path. So math paths are important. So I have one laugh. That was good. I was like, next time we're gonna put science under the microscope.
Don't encourage him. Do not encourage him.
But I kind of think back in time, because when we start looking at these double-digit drops in NAEP scores, right, since COVID, those declines in math weren't a result of COVID. They were prevalent prior to COVID, right? So we've got to go a little bit further back in the timeline. So I like to think about, okay, what were some of those policy decisions? What were some of those things that we changed, and why do we need to tackle this as a practitioner? And I can remember, and this is a conversation I've been engaged with as an educator for over a decade, because I remember trying to help my now 21-year-old daughter, help her with her 3rd grade math homework. Has anybody ever tried doing 3rd grade math? Right? Like, I was a superintendent of a school district, a former 3rd grade teacher who had to come home one day as a parent to a daughter sitting at the table and my wife saying, "You need to help her with her homework. I have no idea what they're doing." And so I'm literally sitting there saying, this is my time to shine. Like, I know this, I got this. And I'm sitting down, and I'd like to think I'm pretty involved in education, at our kitchen table, trying to figure out how to do math homework. And all I kept being told was, that's not how we do it in class, that's not how we do it in class. And then I'm finally like, well, then don't do it, it's a dumb assignment. My wife's like, you can't tell your kids not to do homework. And I'm thinking, if we're blowing up our household, why are people saying they're not math people? Because we have lost our way. We have made it too confusing, and nobody understands how to support their own kids. So how do we expect our 3rd grade teachers? We talked about those foundational years in literacy, those foundational years in math to build on that. We saw some stuff on procedural and conceptual fluency. That's a big deal. So how did we get here, and why did we get here? So part of our story, I'm relatively new to the state. I got here about 2 years ago in the state of Arkansas, and these folks were leading in some work. And fun story, I probably shouldn't admit this, but when I was announced to come as a Secretary of Education, I get confirmed by the Senate, but then I also get voted in by the state board of education. So I came, they made an announcement, I was confirmed by the Senate, and on that Thursday there was a state board of education, and I was like, well, let me look on the agenda to see what they're voting on, I guess I got to start learning on what's going on in the state. And they had on the agenda some updated math standards and frameworks, right? So I'm reading this the night before, and I'm going through that, and I, not meeting one person in the agency, walked into the State Board of Education meeting the next day, met some of the state board members, and went to the chair. I said, hey, I know we just met, but we're not voting on these standards. And there were some very specific reasons why. So step one, when you're looking at key takeaways, I beg of you to go back to your standards and read them, because most of our states, I'm going to say, are grounded in Common Core, and ask yourself, can a parent, a student, and a teacher read this standard and understand what it means and what it looks like in the classroom? Because if they can't, then we've got work to do. And what's happened, and this is how we've lost our way, this is why I can't help my third grader with math homework, is because the standards we've been adopting and building off for the past couple decades have put too many verbs in a standard, and nobody knows which verb takes priority over another verb. So how are you going to find what that looks like in action? So this has led to this phenomena. We've all been doing this. How many of you have unpacked standards? Yeah. We've been unpacking standards for over a decade. They haven't moved in, and we still don't know what they mean. So if you're not unpacking them at the state with clear and concise language and supporting documents and relevant materials, then you're doing your schools and districts a disservice, because you're not setting clear expectations. And what happens specifically in math is that they put examples in the standards, so teachers thought that's how they had to teach those concepts. So I can go into a first grade classroom and talk to a student, and I can say, what's 8 plus 3? And that kid could say 11 with automaticity. But the task is using a thought bubble map, regroup the number of 10s and count the number of 1s, and if they implement the strategy wrong, they don't get credit for the problem. And then we wonder why we have a math problem. Because we're telling kids there's only one way to solve problems. And there's a big problem with some of our math standards when you look at adopting a standard algorithm or the standard algorithm. Words matter, and how you support teachers matter, and how you build instructional materials around that matter. So what's happened in those core early years of math is we've made such a big shift from procedural fluency to conceptual understanding, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but if we go so far to conceptual understanding and kids don't know their math facts, we're doing them a disservice. So what are we doing? We're going back to basics. If third graders don't know their multiplication tables with automaticity, they're not going to be able to factor in middle school. It's too much cognitive load. And we can build all the paths we want, and acceleration and all the opportunities, have all the system and tools in place, but if kids don't know their math facts, they're going to fall further and further behind. So we started doing a lot of work on packing standards, 4 states, rewrote all of them, then started really looking at how can we adopt and build out high quality instructional materials, and then support teachers with implementation. Fidelity of implementation is a big deal. And then how do we design an assessment system that has built in, we have a, for the first time, and we're still working on it, but it will be fully rolled out by next year, unified coordinated progress monitoring system, kindergarten through high school, for ELA math. And in that, in the K-3, we've built in dyslexia and numeracy screeners that are going to identify if students need some additional testings and layers of support. So this is a big, heavy lift, but it starts if you don't have clear and concise language so that teachers can really read and understand what's being expected of them around the concepts being taught, then that's a good opportunity for you to start looking at those 6 key takeaways. Dr. Pride, you want to talk a little bit about instructional materials?
Sure. Yeah, and I would agree, the standards piece, having clarity with standards gives you, the leverage around the adoption piece, because teachers feel good about that. And I would say one of the critical pieces around incentivizing adoption for me was in our strategy around communication. And I know that seems very simple, but that is within itself conceptually a way to incentivize people when they fully understand, you know, like what are we doing and why are we doing it, and that you are part of that, and let's build this ecosystem of support around it. It is the least expensive thing you could do that gives you like the biggest leverage you can have. And so we really started with that, and we defined our ecosystem of support around what does it mean to adopt. And I think that was one of the most powerful pieces, and I always share that because, you know, there were a lot of things we could have started with, but starting there is the most pivotal piece. And as Secretary Oliva said, like, you know, not just stopping there, but really being thoughtful about the implementation piece. So I'll say communication was really big, building that ecosystem of support and making sure that every person on the ecosystem of support understands, like, where are you passing the baton, and the messaging was really key to us really raising our numbers around adoption, in particular around mathematics, because it wasn't required per se, but it was best for kids. And so I'll say that part. Sorry, and I'll pass it to Stacy.
Yeah, so when you talk about high quality instructional materials, especially in Arkansas, we have legislation around literacy.
Yes.
And so we have about 99% of our districts are where they need to be with adopting high quality instructional materials in literacy. We don't have that on the math side, but we're getting there, right? And so one of the strategies that we've used in our state is we've created what we call the Arkansas app. And it is a consolidated federal and state application. We took 17 individual applications, all our federal funds and all of our state plans, everything from family and community engagement. I mean, how many of you have a multitude of state plans that folks have to turn in? ALE, gifted and talented. We took all those different applications and we put them in to one. And we've been very thoughtful about what are the questions that we're asking, all right? So when we look at high quality instructional materials, that's one of the first questions on there, is what's your high quality instructional materials for literacy? And then what professional development are you doing to support that? And then are you using a title fund to support that? How many of you in here can think of a title fund you can use to support high quality instructional materials PD? Right? We've put it in one place. What do you think question number 2 is? What's your high quality instructional material for math? If a district has never thought about high quality instructional materials in math, we're forcing every district in the state to actually have that conversation now. It's not a state law, but now it becomes this very organic team conversation at the district level about what are we using? How do we know if it's high quality? And one of the things that we've not, I mean, we don't have our arms around this piece, but it's coming because we saw it happen with science of reading too. Can we verify right now that the high quality instructional materials that are out there, that are mostly aligned to the standards of Common Core, are aligned to the granular aspect that we've gotten to in our current standards? The argument on mastery learning moving up, and the argument on do kids need to have this conceptual understanding of math, yes, yes. But if you never get to this mastery learning piece on the cognitive load, and you want to talk about science of reading or science of learning, like those are the pieces that go together. But I think a game changer for us in incentivizing districts to make sure they're having those discussions about high quality instructional materials is putting that question on a state application and then asking how they're going to use their money to support that. The opportunity for us as a state now comes with any additional funds that we have to incentivize on top of that. So if you're going to look at doing something in your high quality instructional materials with math and you need supplemental support or professional learning, that's where additional state initiatives come in and us partnering with districts to accomplish that. All right? In that same application, you're going to see questions now about accelerating. And this is an area that, okay, Secretary Key, you've got about 10 minutes of him. He's like this 24 hours a day. Okay? And so, Secretary Oliva, I'm sorry. Oops. Secretary Oliva. He's like this constantly. He's constantly pushing, pushing, pushing. And so when you're talking about acceleration, right, that question now is on our application. How are districts doing that? What are you doing? How are you getting your kids? And we're having to take the standards and we're having to backwards map to accomplish that. In Arkansas, we've had honors courses for years, but what is the honors courses in Arkansas right now? Taking the same course we had and just doing it a little faster and a little harder, but it doesn't mean anything more? All right, but when you backwards map your standards to that, we're now taking standards from advanced courses and pushing them down. Well, you cannot remediate yourself out of the bottom. And that's what we've been doing for a long time. Our kids aren't ready. Slow down. Keep them there. And we're not moving them.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think one of the things that really helped us with the incentivizing piece, with the adoption piece, I agree. The question of, do you have it, automatically makes you assume you need it. They're like, we don't have that. Should we have that? Absolutely. And then I think the piece around the skillful use was also helpful. One of the things that we've done is we took this walk with me, Lord mentality. It's like, you tell me to do it, but can you help me do it? And so we were really focused and dialed in on how do we incentivize in each of our regions. And we used our regional hubs, and we vested there and gave them some support to work with us to help districts with skillful use of mathematics curriculum. And as that began to happen, it just sort of generated across our state, like, oh, I want to do that. We also piloted some what we call math labs, and we take this 3-day approach, and we show them how to implement, like how you can skillfully build implementation in 3 days. And we're in there coaching and working with teachers, and so we're walking beside them, and we're helping them with the implementation. That is also, I won't say a simple way to incentivize, but it is a big way that we've leveraged. We'll help you know what quality math materials are, make it easy for you, give you resources to do that, state resources that anybody can access, and we'll help you with that if needed. Our regions are ready to help you. They're trained to do it. So we took that approach. Lots of things, just kept it rolling. Like, we're just like, okay, the next step is this. And we've done that over, I think we're in our 4th year of this, and it's just proven that the more you scale, the more you continue to work and provide supports in schools, in actual classrooms. Our resources don't just stop at just materials that, like, you're going to know what these are. There are also resources in the classroom where we're there working right beside you. And I say we, but we also have partners that help us with that. So I would say that those are big levers that helped us.
Yeah, and our sessions focus a little bit on high quality instruction materials and implementation with fidelity. And I think a lot of us come from that conversation where the textbook doesn't drive the curriculum, the standards do, right? But at the end of the day, teachers are going to rely on the resources that we give them. And that primary instructional tool matters, and because that's the anchor they're going to use to build all supplemental materials around, or drill down and build maybe high impact tutoring programs or interventions. We saw some slides on what is effective 60-minute day of tier 1 instruction look like. I mean, if we could all truly understand what an effective tier 1 instruction looks like around math and literacy, then we'd solve a lot of our problems. But I say that because investing in teachers, like Dr. Pride was saying, we all know that the research says that's the greatest indicator of improving student learning, is supporting the teachers. We can't just hand them a textbook and shut the door and say, good luck, we'll see you in May and see how your kids did. So we're very diligent about building out those networks and finding those practitioners. And one of the things that we engaged with early on, because I told you, we wrote all new standards, ELA and math, K through 12, basically all new test items to measure those standards in a brand new assessment system. And we're building out how we're going to grade and provide feedback to families and communities around schools. And we use that with Arkansas educators. We brought in some national experts to lead that conversation, but we've had over 3,500 teachers involved in this process. So at the end of the day, whenever you're filming or working on some kind of statewide initiative to build those systems alignments, the experts are in your classrooms. Don't forget that. We're not going to tell you we know all the answers, but if we can get the right people around the table, we can solve any challenge or problem. But one of the first things we did when we were trying to find these folks is all of us have some kind of growth measure for student performance that you can transfer back to a teacher, VAM, value-added measure scores. There's some kind of indicator. The first thing I always like to do every time I start pulling that data is Do we have any high-impact teachers, meaning they're getting learning gains that are one or more standard deviations above the norm? Do we have any high-impact teachers in F schools? Right? I think that's a really easy question to ask, because we're saying the school's in F, meaning students aren't learning where we expect them to do, but we have teachers in this school that are bucking the norm. And do they exist? I promise you they exist. They exist in ELA and they exist in math. So when we started building these networks of teams and started walking into these classrooms to be like, hey, you're at a failing high school and your kid's pass rate on the 10th grade ELA exam or math exam is through the roof. Let's go find out what they're doing. You know what we found when we started visiting these classrooms? One, those teachers had no idea that they were having that kind of an impact. Like, they just thought everybody teaches the way they teach, right? Like, so one, you got to recognize and elevate and celebrate the talent that's working with your students. And number two, we saw students on task, kids working, teachers holding students accountable for learning. Nobody had their head down. Nobody was listening to iPhones. They were all engaged with effective Tier 1 instruction, and the teacher was building scaffold supports. I don't care if it's high school or kindergarten. High quality teaching is high quality teaching, which is why we got to give them the materials and support them.
Yeah, in fact, when we started pulling those lists, we had some of our takeover districts that literally, these are F schools that have been taken over by the state. And we had teachers on there that were high VAM scores. And that's exactly what was happening. It was bell-to-bell instruction. It was grinding it out. It was being very explicit in their instruction. It wasn't anything fancy, right? A lot of times, some of the classrooms you walk in and you see you think, wow, this is amazing. And you look and you see they're not getting the growth, right? And so LEARNS, which was our comprehensive legislation that was passed 2 years ago, pushed in literacy coaches, 120 literacy coaches throughout the state. And it moved us as a state from being stand and deliver PD instruction to hands-on in classrooms, working side by side. And taking that same approach with high-quality professional learning, paired with our high-quality instructional materials, is the same thing that's happening, right? Getting into math classrooms with math teachers who are doing the real work and making sure that they're getting the direct coaching and support. I love the story you tell when we were at Jacksonville and that teacher that had been teaching for 10 years and had a literacy coach. Tell about that.
Yeah, so to Stacy's point, we do a really good job taking our best teachers out of the classroom as much as we can, right? Like, we've got to stop doing that. Coaching matters. Feedback matters. We all know that's high-yield strategies. If we can coach in a classroom, like we're creating a rule at the state agency is we're not pulling people out of classrooms anymore. We're pushing in, and we're working with them side by side. And we've taken our most vulnerable schools and assigned kind of statewide literacy coaches. We're building in numeracy coaches, direct support to work in classrooms with teachers, right? To give them feedback, help them plan, help them look at their data. Let's see what we're going to do. And I remember once I was sitting in a classroom and I was following the coach for the day, and they were doing an amazing job, and they were working with this teacher. And we were in a first or second grade classroom. The teacher was struggling with basic strategies like I do, we do, you do. Right? Like, we're not talking anything like sophisticated, but just some basic structures. And I remember the teacher looking at the coach in the middle of the lesson, asking for feedback, like, hey, I feel like they're not getting this. I think I'm going to do this. The coach is giving them thumbs up, giving encouragement. And the teacher looked at the coach in the middle of the lesson and said, I'm so glad you're helping me become a better teacher. I asked that teacher, I said, how long have you been teaching first grade? She said, 10 years. 10 years, and she's struggling. How she survived 10 years, I don't know, but I'm thinking that's 200 kids that she could have been more effective if she had some direct support. So getting into the classrooms matter. I encourage you, as we engage in these conversations, the research is consistent, and it's going to be similar anywhere United States. If I walked into any one of your schools and started pulling grade books, and we talk about effective Tier 1 instruction, 80% of the students are going to get A's and B's on the assignments we give them. It doesn't matter. But 20% of the time, it's going to be on grade level. So if we can at least have that mantra and that mindset in supporting with curriculum, my conversations with districts are very clear around starting to define effective Tier 1 instruction. Every child gets grade level instruction each and every single day, period. I'm not saying kids don't need intervention, and I'm not saying kids don't need additional support. But if a kid never gets grade level instruction, how are they ever going to reach it? And we're really good about loving our students into mediocrity, saying they may not be ready for this, or I don't want to frustrate them. I call those instructional myths, that we got to meet kids at their frustration level or their instructional level. We need to meet kids on grade level and give them help, period. And if we can do that, that's when you're going to see the needle move. And there's a lot of data that you can pull. We haven't figured it all out. I like to pull the data, and one of the first things I like to look at, especially in math, because we're doing a lot of great work in literacy, but if you're going to be successful in post-secondary outcomes, college algebra matters, right? That's the gatekeeper of getting a degree. And I'm not saying if you struggle in college algebra, you can't get one. A lot of schools are doing some great supports and equivalencies. But if you go into remedial math from high school, your chances of being a graduate with your cohort diminishes greatly. I took all the kids that left a high school in Arkansas and went to a state college that didn't go into college algebra higher. They went into remedial math. 64% of those students had a 3.0 GPA. They left our high school and went to remedial math. 64% at 3.0 or higher GPA. And it was like less than 5% of them took a math class their senior year. Right? So is this important work? Yes. I think there's a lot of levers we can pull. I know we're running up on time. Stacy and Kiffany will be here the rest of the day to answer questions. And I'm going to give you Stacy's cell phone number if you want to call her later. But thank you for being here and for being a part of this important work. I know we're running out of time, and we're all in this together.
Thank y'all.
Thanks.